who is also a historian of ceramics in India, as well as being a very renowned ceramist herself. So these are the three people I'd like to thank for this. So this talk is actually a love letter to Delhi. And I'm not a Delhiite, and there are many things about Delhi that I just can't stomach, but there are parts of Delhi I just adore. And so this letter, this talk, is a love letter to this city. As an art historian, and as a person who's had to find a way to love this city, this is my way. And it is a design etymology, it is a history, but it's also, I think, a very interesting tale. Like Delhi has had millions of people tell tales about it. And people remember songs that were written 800 years ago, like Chap Tilak. So if people should have that kind of memory about a city, I think I owe it something, besides irritation. So, please take it with all the love I feel for this city, and I hope you also love it a little bit more after this. Okay, so let me just begin by explaining two words which are part of the title, wabi-sabi and swadeshi. So wabi-sabi is a term that comes out of Japanese aesthetics, and it means a lot of things. An enjoyment and an acceptance and a pleasure in imperfection, in ephemeral things, in the evanescence of life, that life will come to an end always. But there is beauty in going towards the end, in the broken thing that is repaired in time, the effects of time. Wabi-sabi was very important as a historical form of aesthetics, starting about in the 1500s in Japan, as the Tokugawa the shogunate culture had to confront the new mercantile culture that was growing in Japan. And if the shogunates were very glitzy and very beautiful gold and lovely enameled and lacquered things, the merchants offered an alternative aesthetic, and I'm putting it quite crudely, but they offered a slightly alternative aesthetic of things which were borrowed from ceramics that came from Korea, from Philippines, from Vietnam, from Cambodia, which were more folksy, for a lack of a better word, which were more folksy. I'm not going to go into all that history, but this is part of a longer project. What's ended up happening is that I have a little book now that has come out of maybe 2.5 years of thinking about this, with partly with my colleague and partly with the support of Christine Michael and other people here. So this is a really important thing, and wabi-sabi is in India, and I want to talk a little bit about that today. The other thing I want to talk about is swadeshi, and when I speak about swadeshi is, of course, very familiar to all of you as a question of Gandhian philosophy and Gandhian ideas, for example, khadi. But what I really want to also alert you to, is that Swadeshi just wasn't for Gandhians in that very strict notion of qadar and all those sort of things, but it was for the larger political, financial argument he was making, which is that we need to make stuff in India. And we need to make stuff in India, and we need to make stuff in India that for Indian life, right? So I want to look at these two things, wabi-sabi and swadeshi, through the figure of this remarkable man who many people in this audience know. So if you know him better than I do, I'm so happy that you're here. But I'm also very happy after this lecture if you find me and say, I have a story to tell you about Sardar Gurcharan Singh, because I want to learn about him from you. So here is a remarkable man, and I've spent a lot of time thinking about what Delhi was like for him, because he wasn't from Delhi. He was from Gujranwala, and he came to Delhi at a certain moment, which I will tell you in a second, over the course of this conversation. And I wanted to understand how he might have seen Delhi when he came here, when New Delhi was being made. The Delhi that we take for granted today was being made in his lifetime, when he was a young man. And that's a very exciting thing for me, because I'm an architectural historian primarily, but the other area that I work on is crafts. So, I wanted to bring these things together in this talk. So let me first begin by saying that when everybody thinks about pottery or craft in general today, we think of rural India. Craft is not just a rural thing. Craft has historically always been part of urban phenomenon. Delhi could not have existed without the great craftsmanship in Purani Delhi, whether it was the cooks or Lucknow or Calcutta or Mysore. Mysore set up its art academy simply to build that gorgeous palace in the heart of Mysore, right? So cities have always been famous for their crafts. So what I want to alert to you, is the fact that Guru Charan Singh started a craft in Delhi that was already part of Delhi in some ways, but made it part of the Delhi's present, not just its past. So Guru Charan Singh was born again in Gujranwala, and he came to Delhi in the 19th century. He came to Delhi as a young man because a friend of his father's, he had studied geology, he had done really well, and he was not from any hereditary craft community. He came to Delhi because his father's friend said, I am involved along with other people in building in providing bricks for the New Delhi. So they're building New Delhi. I need some help. Will you send your son? And he came, and he wasn't that interested. But उस ज़माने में बच्चे अपने पिता की बात सुनते थे. So he came, and he said somewhere in one of many of his writings, he said he came and he found something in clay, and that was it, right? So he came to. Let me just make sure, yeah. So he came to Delhi Potteries. It wasn't yet Delhi Blue Pottery, it was Delhi Potteries. And he made friendship with a person, a lifelong friendship, a journey between Abdullah, who came from a community of hereditary ceramic craftspeople, who were from, all the books say that they're from Pathan origins or Pathan rulers. They came there from somewhere from Afghanistan or Central Asia. And today, a group of these people are at a very well-known place for ceramics just outside of Delhi called Khurja. And in fact, his grandson is there now in Khurja, Abdullah's grandson. So these two people got together, and they created this really interesting craft form called Delhi Blue Pottery, which feels so domestic when you ask people, "वो सरदार के बारे में बात कर रहे हो आप?" And or Daddy ji के बारे में बात कर रहे हो? But I want to kind of say, let's just step back and look at this glorious project between two people and what impact it had. So let's just briefly think about the history of ceramics in Delhi for a brief minute. So Delhi has a lot of ceramics, much before this. So this is a Chinese blue and white ware plate that was found in Purana Kila, and it's in the ASI's collection. And it dates from 1325 to 1375. Very important. We know, for example, I read a very interesting book called Sair ul Manazil, or another book, I forgot what its name is, that Firoz Shah's Bimaristan, a hospital, had beautiful ceramics where the patients, jahan pe mariz lete the. So there was this culture of putting these gorgeous ceramics, painted ceramics in very beautiful places. We don't have any evidence of that, but it's important to know that this culture of ceramics was here and very deeply in the city very early on. And of course, all kinds of ceramics kept coming from Central Asia to Delhi. So there's a painting of Babur coming to India and stopping at this fantastic jam minaret that was painted in Akbar's atelier. This amazing minaret, which is, of course, something very important for the Qutub Minar. And, of course, the Qutub has all the calligraphy in local Mathura stone, but the jam minaret has all the calligraphy in ceramic, in blue tile, beautiful turquoise blue tile, as you can see at the bottom, right? There's also amazing places like the tomb of Rukni Alam in what is today Pakistan, in Multan, and amazing play between brick and the blue of this stone, the blue of this the glaze that's on these ceramics, on these tiles. And of course, this magnificent tomb for Timur in Samarkand, where the blue of the dome and the blue of the sky. I'm not going to go into great detail. You must understand that blue must have been so important sensuously for people all around, because you have to remember, this is a landscape in which the sky was really blue until very recently. Delhi had very blue skies, and it was a plain. So anything that you saw on that landscape would be very visible for long distances and from the mountains and hills that surround it, right? So if you can't see the blue from great distances today, that was not the reality even 40 years ago or 30 years ago, right? So the celebration of this beautiful turquoise blue, you must know, maybe some of you know this because you know this because you know it, but the word for blue and green is very similar. There's no differentiation in many languages. So you can go from ajrak, which is in Arabic blue, to subs, which is green, but then they can go back and forth. And subs is, of course, green in Persian. You can go back and forth, and there's no clear distinction. So I think this has to do something with the fact that you can blend colors, and you can produce them, right? So, and of course, very early on, people like Mansingh at Gwalior began to understand the beauty of ceramics, and this is Gwalior Fort with this amazing tile work all over it that comes from the rulers who were there. And this is, of course, coming back to Delhi now. This is the Shish Gumbad in Lodi Gardens. Take a walk outside today if you can in the evening and just take pleasure in this city and the beauty of time that's still there. And of course, this is the Jahaz Mahal at Mehroli. You can see in the Chhatris the beautiful blue turquoise tiles. This is Sabzburz. It was green. It was made blue during the Commonwealth Games. They're restoring it again, right? This is, of course, on top of Humayun's tomb. This is also another place in Delhi. This is at the tomb of Adga Khan. So there's all these different ways of dealing with tile. You can do it in very beautiful colors, haftarang, or you can do it in geometric patterns, or you can do it in floral patterns. I'm not going to get into all that history, but there's a lot of sophistication in how to handle ceramics, both in colors, in shapes, in the type of imagery that you're going to make. And of course, lots of ideas about how to highlight certain parts of buildings with this gorgeous ceramic ware, gorgeous tile work. Now, most of this tile work is made in all over. Could you not talk here, please? I'm finding it very difficult. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Okay. So most of this tile in Delhi and wherever it was made in what is today Pakistan was based on a natural phenomenon. And that is what happens in this part of South Asia, where after the monsoons and the monsoon rain starts coming up, just like you suck up a straw with water, these capillaries pull up the water to the surface and they suck out the minerals and the salts, and it deposits all over the landscape. और इसको हिंदी में कहते हैं रे. And this is a silica. It becomes a silica, which then quickly is also known as कांच because it's made into glass. So आप फिरोजाबाद में जो कांच के चूड़ियाँ बनाते हैं, all this is made from this naturally produced silica. So this is the type of material that was used for the glazing. So where did the colors come from? Those beautiful blues. So there's a really remarkable study done by Maninder Singh Gill and a couple of other people from University College of London. And what they did when they analyzed the tile, what they found out was that the tiles that are made in Multan and in West Punjab, they're based on chemical formulas that come from Kush and Persia. But the tiles that are made around Delhi, Agra region come from materials that come from Shekhawati. The color, the cobalt, come from the K3 mines, where even today there's copper mining. So to make these, that blue color, both the cobalt and the turquoise, you need cobalt oxide and you need copper. And there are different formulas for those, but both of these tell us that they come from the K3 mines in Shekhawati. And they came from there till 1908 when, for some reason, which I will investigate and figure out in the future, cobalt oxide started being imported. And it wasn't made in India. So the first thing that we need to understand about Guru Sharan Singh is he's really thinking about where his source materials are coming from. He's doing Swadeshi, but he's doing it in an interesting way. I want you to hold on to that as I take you through this, right? Now, just to show you the two shades of blue. And then this is the clay body, which is not terracotta. It's a stone paste that's made in grind, but you can see how the layer of color sits on top of that. Okay, just to quickly alert you, this is at Jaipur Blue Pottery, and this is how they make tiles and to little blocks of cookie dough, right? This is and then these are the kinds of bhattis that they make them in, right? And this is actually the frit surface. These are the kind of furnaces that were used for centuries. So you need, you put a batch of frit in that crucible, and then it's heated up, and then it drips down, and then it comes and settles in the pan, which you can see in the picture. So this is the raw batch, and this is as it falls into the water and becomes this kind of thing as it cools, right? So then this is then ground up and used as part of the glazing process. I haven't put everywhere, but these pictures are from Maninder S. Gill's dissertation. I put it on the first slide, I didn't put it on the everyone, so this is from his dissertation. So if we think about Guru Sharan Singh, what did he see? Well, with the next stage of this project, when I sit down and read an inventory of Delhi's buildings made by a man who was a Delhi man for a Britisher who lived in Delhi called Sairul Manazil, we would know what existed in Delhi in the 1800s and what was left after the British were done building and remaking New Delhi. That takes a little bit of time, but we can do this work. We can figure it out. But at least, at a minimum, if I work backwards from what's available today, if you see where the blue pin is, that's Delhi Blue Pottery in what is now the border of Arkepuram and Sarojini Nagar off of Ring Road. Now it's in Delhi Blue Apartments, right, that area. And in that area, and all the black pins are all the places where Abdullah and Guru Sharanji would have seen lots of examples of existing tile work from the Lodi and the Mughal period, right? So let me just talk about his entry into ceramics. So Delhi was being made, and that's the Secretariat being made, and look at the number of bricks that are used in it. You needed a lot of bricks. If you just go to Khan Market and you stand at Sujan Singh apartments there, understand that all those were bricks that were made in those years between the 1910s and the 1930s. That's Delhi's first apartment building, if I'm not mistaken. And Shobha Singh was the contractor who made it, and he was working with Mr. Kabli, who was the head of Delhi Potteries. So he came to this place when all this work was happening, and it's very much a kind of batch production industrial kind of unit, industrial ceramic unit of that variety. So it's a karkhana. And immediately when he came, Mr. Kabli said and promised his father also, he said, if Guru Sharan comes here and helps me out, I will send him to Japan for training. And Japan was a very important alternative source for training for various professions. Besides going to England or to Germany, Japan was a very important place. He went to Japan and he studied at the Tokyo Polytechnic, I think, is the name of the school. And he studied there, and he learned how to make industrial pottery, and I'll show you an example of what industrial pottery in Japan looked like that at the time. But he also met simultaneously Soetsu Yanagi, Shoji Hamada, and Bernard Leach, three of the great figures of 20th century arts and crafts movement, both in the late stages in England as well as in Japan. And Japan was itself going through a tremendous crisis about its rapid industrialization and the fear of losing all of its historic crafts forms. And so there were all these people trying to figure out, like, how do we make a new kind of person who's not the village potter, so that's what I show you here, a Japanese village workshop, not a industrial factory-based workshop, but a new kind of person, what people in our historical world call the artist craftsperson, who is somewhere between these two figures, who can mediate this information and create a new kind of space for this. So Guru Shenji walked right into this world where it was completely industrial and commercial, and also completely craftsmanly and very elite in its own way. So people were drawing new kinds of shapes. There is a beautiful set of drawings made by Kawai, I just forgot his last name, but a very important Mingei potter who was working. This is Bernard Leach and Shoji Hamada and Yanagi, and there's again Yanagi there. They're collecting, they're drawing, they're figuring out like what kind of shapes, how do you combine world folk pottery and world aesthetics about the folk and craft and all these sort of things. And this is, of course, a beautiful a celadon vase that Guru Shenji made while in Japan, and I was thrilled to see this for the first time. But there was also another thing happening in India at the time, which is that when he came back from Japan, it was very hard for him to do anything about setting up a unit for industrial pottery in India, because Japanese companies were flooding India with cheaply made tiles. Why? Because British India was going through a terrible crisis over hygiene. So everybody wanted to, so the legacy of what you see everywhere in Delhi's buildings, जहाँ पे पान थूकते हैं और वहाँ पे tiles लगे हैं, that's from this era, where there was a thought that if you put tiles everywhere, you will be able to clean it, and you will be able to create hygienic surfaces where people will see the evidence of their own littering and their own bad behavior, quote unquote. So here remember, this is the era of hospitalization and thinking about diseases and all these in a new ways. So Japan was flooding India with cheap tiles. So for example, they were making, this is a temple in Calcutta where you can see Ravi Varma's Japanese tiles with Ravi Varma's Lakshmi on them. You can see how a sample of a tile that was made in England was manufactured in Japan and then sent to India. And you can see the light blue, turquoise blue line, how it peaks in 1926 of exports to India from Japan, just when Guru Sharan Singh comes back to Delhi. So there's no room for him to set up any kind of industrial unit. And this is taken from the research that Aki Toyoyama is doing on the export of Japanese tiles to India. So he does something else. He goes to work in Bundi for the Maharaja. He's a geologist. He can do that there. He goes and sets up pottery training industrial pottery training institutes in Ambala and all these different places. In this, on the photograph on your right, is the fifth and the sixth person on the standing from the left are the founders of Phylum Potteries, which still exists in Gurgaon. So he created, through his educational work, a generation of people who went on to set up more potteries. And both industrial, and of course today everybody thinks of Guru Sharanji as the father of Indian studio pottery, but he had, what I want to say is Swadeshi meant that he had a foot in many different things. And he was successfully, could you please close that door? I'm sorry. Though I love Adele, It's not for now. Okay, so one thing I want us to hold on to is that Swadeshi wasn't, for Guru Sharanji, wasn't a purist thing. He was able to really carefully knit this out, partly because of his education and partly out of the times he lived in and the kind of travels he did, but also partly because I think of who he was. Now, I just want us to think a little bit about post-partition, post-independence Delhi. So if you put in Google post-partition Delhi, all you see is mayhem. Just riots and mayhem. If you do post-independence Delhi, you see a different Delhi. So I put both of them for you at the same time, so you could see what Guru Sharanji was experiencing like many other people when he came to Delhi. He was in Pakistan. His son was studying in what is today Pakistan, then it was not Pakistan. His son was studying in Shimla, and they had to make a choice, and then they came quickly to now what was India. And they had to set up a life for themselves here, and he decided to set up Delhi Blue Pottery on the grounds of Delhi Potteries. And because he had married, of course, the beautiful daughter of Mr. Kabli, who had sent him off to Japan and trained him. And Chhattarkar was a dietitian. She had studied dietetics in London, and she came back, and she was apparently a formidable person who ran Delhi Blue Pottery in her own way and was very nice to guests and people and all sorts of things. So let's just look at Delhi just before partition, in the years before partition. So look at these fabulous images. It says the east is west and the west is west and the east is east, but it's the merchant that makes them meet. And this is at an exhibition in Delhi, and this is from the Lala Narayan Prasad collection. And the right side is an image that I've taken out of Guru Sharanji's book called Pottery in India, where in a 1935 exhibition, he has put all his potteries and he has put "Buy Indian." So it's really interesting because these two worlds are there at the same time. I don't know what to say about this, but we know that in Delhi, because New Delhi was being set up, the party culture, hosting people, bureaucrats, everybody needed china sets, tea sets. Lots of things were coming from abroad, from Japan. Things were also being made here. Remember that Gwalior Potteries was around the corner from Delhi Blue Pottery or Delhi Potteries. And the Scindia family were big on commercial ceramics. If you go to Gwalior today and you go to the Jaivilas Palace Museum, you will see in Chinku Raje's bedrooms and dining areas all the products, not only their imported favorites, but also the products that their factory produced. So there was a lot of competition there. And of course, just to remember, what was Delhi like? So Delhi had Jama Masjid as the head of 200 masjids in this city, the head. And Delhi, during partition, had both the old Delhi area, which provided most of the goods for the city, not the new areas like Lajpat Nagar and Defense Colony, but everybody went to Old Delhi to get their stuff, right? And also the simultaneous scene was that around Humayun's tomb were refugees and victims of violence living. So it's a completely complicated picture that Abdullah and Guru Sharanji would have seen in those years. Just to give you some facts, and this is taken out of the research that Gyanesh Gudesia in his beautiful book, A Republic in the Making, about Delhi in the 1950s, about India in the 1950s and 60s, where he says that approximately 10,000 Muslims were massacred in this city. Approximately 44,000 Muslim homes were abandoned or forcibly evacuated. 329,000 Muslims, 2/3 of the city's Muslim inhabitants left. In the 1941 census, 44% of the population was Muslim. In the 1951 census, 5.71% of the population was Muslim. Out of the 200 mosques, as I already said, 137 were destroyed. So this city had just completely changed within a decade. And for Guru Sharan Singh Ji to set up a pottery with a Muslim potter was not, it's never written or discussed anywhere. But it's an important thing that he did. And there's evidence that he was very clear about what he was doing. He knew what he was doing. So, what else was happening in Delhi? Of course, very quickly after 1947, rapid construction of housing. So this is in 1953 in Lajpat Nagar, Connaught Place. You can see the beginnings of taxis, Kali Pili taxis. Very soon, you can also see the auto rickshaw. The auto rickshaw was there in the 1950s. I wondered when it started, but it's a Delhi thing from the 1950s onwards. Very early. There's a memoir of somebody who was a professor at London School of Economics who came here in the 30s, the 40s, and the 50s. And one thing he talks about is the auto rickshaw coming in the 50s. And there's also people like Dharampal Gulati, who started off as a school dropout in Lahore, I think it was Lahore, but it might be mistaken. And then he comes as a partition refugee to Delhi. And he starts a small shop in Old City, and then he starts it in Karol Bagh, and it is Mahasyan Di Hatti, which is now MDH. So there were all these people that went to MDH Spices, people who moved from rags to riches, and that's, of course, him and his fancy car now. He's 99 years old. I don't know if he's still alive, but that's a picture, right? And of course, the Delhi was also really famous for its Republic Day parade, so this was big design culture here. Nataraj, who was the dancer with the husband of Maya Rao, the Kathak dancer who then moved to Bangalore later. Her husband worked with Nehru to design the Republic Day parade floats. So what is a very interesting sort of, there's an archive of that. Also, people bought things off the road. So what was happening in Delhi, from what I've understood from all these people who set up shops, or became small-time business people in Delhi after partition, after being refugees, is that the old shopkeepers like to sit inside the shop. And the refugees would sit on the sidewalk. The old shopkeepers waited till they got the price they wanted. The people on the road would make the bargain that day because they wanted to get rid of the stuff and go home with money in their hands. So this is a very interesting space in which Guru Sharanji is entering. He's not a refugee in that sense, but he's an in-between kind of guy. He has a wife who's from Delhi, and he's worked in Delhi, but he's not fully established that way in Delhi. So he's seeing a lot of different things. What happened? And of course, by the 1970s, when Guru Sharanji is still alive and he lived a ripe old age into his 90s, things like the supermarkets started coming. And of course, this is a fabulous collage made by Biswin Sadi, by I forgot his name. I'm sorry, I didn't put his name, but the book is called Biswi Sadi Memoirs. And this is for his the 20 years of his childhood growing up in 60s and 70s Delhi, where this new consumer culture is rapidly proliferating. Biscuit packets and radios and the coming of television and record players, the Beatles. It's just like a new world. New world is happening. Did I skip something? Okay, so just to bring us back. So this is what M.S. Gill, Maninder Singh Gill, how he maps out the process for producing Central Asian and Multan and Delhi ceramics. This is the general process, like you can see. So Gurshan Ji Singh's book is called Pottery in India. And if you look at the chapters, you'll see that he's working in this very interesting space. He's writing art history. He's writing a technological background, like familiarizing people with what is pottery in India, what he himself built up a collection of pottery from Japan and Korea and Central Asia, and they traveled all over the world looking at pottery. He had stuff from Yanagi and all these different places. And also, he had a very good understanding of glazes because he was a geologist. He really understood, and he was a terrific experimenter. And so what he did was when he set up Delhi Blue Pottery, is he created products for a new Delhi, Delhi that didn't exist before 1947. And this Delhi was a Delhi full of diplomats, of housewives. There's a little bit of a problem with, okay, and so diplomats and housewives, he loved to call himself an art potter. He was an art potter, but he also produced things that people could buy and take home and use. He also continued to work with Abdullah. So Abdullah threw these incredible pots, which were not familiar to him from his inherited tradition. The shapes, I think, were developed between a discussion between him and Guru Sharanji. They're shapes which he could technically produce in clay, but they were cut off and truncated in new ways. So, for example, sliced in such a way that the curve was different or the edge was different. Okay, so you can see this. And Guru Shanji's great skill was he developed a way to think about pouring glaze on all this pottery. So he didn't produce a lot of painted ware. He produced glazed ware. So Abdullah's pots were canvases for his glaze art. If we can think about it this way, that's what it was. And he used very pure blue, very beautiful blues. He also used colors. And we must remember at this juncture that Marx once told us that color is the most important aesthetic in popular culture. And it's very clear if you look at Gwalior ceramics and many ceramic industries that were developing for domestic tableware and stuff, that if you didn't want to do the painted ceramics with flowers and those sort of things, you did pure color ceramics because you just put it through the factory assembly line, pour it into the mold, dip it into color, out it comes, yellow, red, green. It's cheap to produce. So he's combining lots of knowledges and creating this amazing thing. And also, he's doing something else. So one page in his book has at one corner this plate that he made with Allah written on it, and diagonally at the other corner is this plate with Om written on it. So without saying anything, he's doing these really interesting things with his work and his idea of what India should be, or what his pottery could do, or things like that. I don't know enough about this, but I can see some elements of something like this is happening in his work. And of course, these are photographs. People were coming and photographing his pottery like beautiful consumer products, art products. So this is also from the Lala Narayan Prasad collection, and he's being photographed. You can see that beautiful teapot and this beautiful cup and saucer. And of course, ladies in nice saris with little pocketbooks on their arms were coming to shop them. Remember I said this is the new Delhi. This is the formidable Delhi socialite, right? So they're coming and they're shopping, and of course he would sit and guide women. Are ye big, but you really like it? Okay, you please take this. You know, so very good salesperson also. And of course he produces this extraordinary. So now I'm going to talk about these glazes. So this is the recipe he gives us for this particular glaze. And remarkable blue. You can still buy this all over. Many ceramists in Delhi produce this. And the sheen, I want you to hold on to that sheen. This is not the shapes may be coming out of his experience in Japan, of learning Mingei pottery, folk pottery in Japan. The color might be coming from, the color is probably coming out of the history of Islamic ceramics. But the sheen is really a new thing that I think he's introducing out of the gleam of industrial ceramics, the things that people associate with luxury, right? Because if you look at, so of course he made all these products. He produced the beautiful Delhi blue jalis at India International Center, and that jalis at Liverpool Gardens in England. And now I want to take you on a little bit of a journey of how he thought about design as I come to my conclusion. So this is the Kamandalu set. Many of you are familiar with his beautiful Kamandalu pot, and it's based on his own glazing. It's based on this. This is what ascetics carry all over India for water, and it's called the kamandalu. And you notice that the handle isn't on the side, it's on the top. So you could maybe even throw it on your arm as you're carrying something while you're walking, because you're an ascetic, right? So you need to have your hands free sometimes. And also, it's much easier to do this and get water from a river, or lower it into a well and make sure that the water comes out. Do you understand what I'm saying? So it's a very thought out object. So he, of course, was looking at all this kind of ceramics when he was traveling, but particularly in that year between 1919 and 1922 in Japan, looking at gorgeous, but there's no gleam here. None of that gleam which I showed you, that shine, that sheen, is not in any of these ceramics that I'm going to quickly show you. So this is another thing he would have seen. This doesn't have that kind of shine. This is that wabi-sabi aesthetic. This is Bernard Leach's own teapot, whom Guru Sharanji knew in both in Japan and in England when he traveled there. And of course, he also was aware of two different ways of drinking tea. This is Mary Cassatt's painting of two women in Paris sitting and sipping tea in a very, there's a particular way that these cups were designed so that when you sat, your pinky would be out like this. You can see her pinky. So that handle had created a certain silhouette of refinement. You understand? That handle wasn't geared to hook your whole fingers through it. It was meant to be held very delicately, and then your pinky stuck out so that you would have balance and a profile, right? Design is often about silhouettes, what you create, like the minaret against the sky or the dome or whatever. So that, and then the other way that he was very familiar is the handleless chawan, the tea bowl, which you hold like this, because in a very cold climate with no heating, your body heat keeps the tea warm, right? So he knows both these cultures. But he also knew, he would have seen, not exactly these things, but the long history of the kinds of things. So this is the Spode Imari tea set. He would have known about all these experiments. He would have known, for example, a Dutch experiment of trying to do Japanese and Chinese style teaware in Holland, trying to create some sort of a hybrid object. These things had very interesting objects. I'm not going to go into them. Or the Spode, or these experiments to introduce India onto English in ceramics. This is the Spode Indian tree. Or he would have known about these fabulous kinds of tea services that were called company silver. This is made in Kutch. And he would have also known very much that tea was just being introduced to India. So this is Lipton was beginning to make posters to sell tea to India. In order to sell tea in India, you needed to have the technology called CTC, cut, torn, and curled, which made it cheap enough to sell in India, not just for export, right? And women were beginning to be shown as right proper ladies with their tennis and drinking tea. You can see how she's drinking. Gentlemen also drank tea. These were the westernized non-Swadeshi types, right? And of course, tea was being sent like a dulha or a Krishna coming to villages. It was being packaged. Apparently, Lipton sent out people on cycles with tea, and they taught people how to make tea with milk all across rural India. That's how it was marketed. And so, and then, of course, there was the colonial history of tea, of seeing the Mem Sahib taking the tea leaf, tea that's being poured by the plantation worker into her teacup, but later, and of course also the Indian Mem Sahib. So it's very much a Raj lifestyle beverage. But very quickly, tea is also being suggested that it's very important for the good student who wants to study and excel in government service exams. So similarly, coffee was also marketed in South India for students who were studying to get their degrees. But immediately in 1947, the story of tea changes, because tea was supposed to be not Swadeshi because it was a British drink. But the minute 1947 comes, the tea board is set up and it calls it a Swadeshi drink. So all these posters start coming out, very interesting. Nowhere can you imagine that the charkha and a woman wearing her sari over her head and a teacup would all come together. It's a completely new world that's being imagined right in front of you, all at once, 100%. And these maps are being made to show where all trees being grown on India. It's completely Swadeshi. And of course, the stamps are being issued, Swadeshi tea, tea is Indian. And of course, an Indian teacup is developed, the Kullad. This was developed probably in Calcutta as a cup to give theater goers an opportunity to have tea during breaks, right? And he knows all of this, and he's also dealing with this kind of clientele. I'm reconstructing this world for you as I'm reconstructing it for myself, what he was thinking. And so when he arrives at this thing, he's combined everything. There's a wabi-sabi in it. There is Swadeshi in it. There is the Indian kamandalu in it. There is the English way of holding the teacup in it. And there's a peculiar shine to it, which is not there in the... He's invented something new for us. And that's where I'd like to close my talk. Thank you so much for your patience.
Thank you so very much. Once again, I'd like to thank Dr. Garimella for reconstructing all of this for us, taking us on that beautiful visual journey, ladies and gentlemen. Gurcharan Singh's Delhi Boo Pottery, and so much more from the post-independent era. Thank you so much, ma'am. That was absolutely fantastic. And this is what takes us to yet another very interesting session where we're about to take you through the built heritage. For any country, it is a cultural asset. It is that country's identity that connect with saving something for the future generations to cherish. Ladies and gentlemen, to tell us more about conserving built heritage, I'd like to welcome Mr. Kelvin Angkaeng, Built Heritage Conversationalist at Singapore. May I request all of you to please welcome him.
It's such a privilege to be here in New Delhi for the first time for me in India. So it's really been both mind-opening and eye-opening, and my spirit as well. So great thanks to Sunita for the opportunity to be invited here and to really share a bit of my own experience with built heritage, and I think learn from you after. Of course, India is such an ancient city, and I think there's an image of India, of New Delhi, that comes through the buildings that you have built and you've inherited and fortunately put under protection. But of course, now times for change. And I'd like to share a bit about what I think conserving built heritage can offer for society in the centuries ahead from the perspective of sustainability, right? I mean, there are plans for New Delhi and for Old Delhi to be World Heritage Sites, so let's hope we find the right way ahead and we learn from each other. So this is Singapore, 50 years ago, the post office and the river. And this is where Singapore is now. We are just marking 200 years of our modern history. It's an interesting year. Any bicentennial of a post-colonial society is challenging because we have to debate about what we are, where we are from, what we've become, and where we're going to. And interestingly, this year also marks 720 years of the foundation of ancient Singapore. And one day I shall make it to Calcutta too, the former capital of old Singapore under the British times, right? But Singapore's image, I've heard from many people, is a modern city, glass and steel. It's a green city, lots of trees everywhere. It can't compare to New Delhi. New Delhi is really amazing, right? But what people don't think of Singapore is that it's historic. It's just not the image. And this is something that we, my friends and I, and the government and in the profession and the NGOs have been trying to change in the past 50 years. So I think anywhere in the world when it comes to sustainability, whether you're a big country or small town, there are all these issues about needs. Many needs to be sustained. And of course, for a city and a country, when it comes about people, it's never just about the physical needs, it's about the emotional needs, the spiritual needs, the software aspects of what makes a city special to you or to me, or what makes your country, and my country, my country. Many cities and many countries are still thinking about needs in terms of the physical needs. But I would like to propose that it is possible to start talking about intangible needs like heritage, well-being, parks. Should this be needs that we as planners, as architects, as engineers, as NGOs work towards providing for our people, right? This is a quote that has anchored me in the past 20 years of my work, and before that as a student. Our first Minister of Culture, I guess, unlike India, Singapore really is an artificial construction. We are people from all over the world. So what is this memory that we wish to create for a city, for a country that, in a sense, is artificial? And in other contexts, in other countries, I suppose what is the role of memory that can be used to build a spirit to support the journey ahead, right? When we talk about livability and sustainability, do old buildings have a place? Do we see conservation as conservation of antiquities, of objects in glass boxes in museums only? Or do we see that old buildings and areas have a place in the journey ahead in terms of livability, sustainability, community? From my experience, I believe that this is where we should be going ahead. So this is some thought that I've been working on with some of my colleagues in the university. Off and on we talk about it. Can heritage and culture be part of the UN's sustainability roadmap, the 17 goals? We talk about basics of water, air, jobs, housing. But how about participation? How about cultural and natural heritage? It is mentioned there briefly in Goal 11 and Targets 3 and 4, but can we actually make our work in cultural conservation really part of sustainability so that the people who live in these environments feel that they can participate, or they have heritage that makes them feel that they're proud to be something, you know? From what I can sense from my day here, everyone who's from Delhi is very proud to be from New Delhi or Delhi, and people who are from elsewhere in India say, I'm from this town, I'm from that state. You are very clear as to where you are from. Maybe it's from your mother's milk and from the tea that you drank as a child. But this is something that I think we have to build in a positive way. I think when we are confident about where we are from, we can be much more open and inclusive because it's not about challenging each other. Yeah, we are confident and we can be generous, right? So, but I think everywhere in the world, we're just talking to some of my seniors here I've met for the first time. What is it about urban conservation that's so difficult? Is it because very often vernacular architecture is in such a state of disrepair that people cannot see the value of vernacular buildings, which makes up the lived experience of the majority of us? There is room for ancient ruins, palaces, and forts, but how about the day-to-day buildings that have been built up in thousands of years through the artistic creativity of the unknown, anonymous builder, carpenter, craftsman, you know? Singapore went through that. The war gave us a very bad situation because of rent control of refugees. And when you live in a house like this, with maybe 124 people and a carpenter's workshop, my mother grew up in this environment. I went as a child to a house like this. Her family house was a 3x3 square meter cubicle for her mum and her sister, and that was luxury because they could afford the cubicle by the airwell. When you live in this environment, I think it's very hard for the people on the street to think about heritage. They have other needs, and I think we as heritage conservation, we have to think about their livelihood. How do we give them a better environment while we think of saving the vernacular city? Right. So the usual plan, of course, is to renew totally, to rebuild totally. This is what we've inherited from post-war modern planning around the world. This happened in Singapore as well. And in that period, left and right, if I were to give you the vote, or if I were to ask your grandparents to vote, they would say, I want to leave the old city. I want the new flat, because the new flat gives me flushing water, gas, and safety. Right? So we have to deal with these issues about development when we talk about heritage. It can never just be about the building and its beauty. Right? So what we have today in Singapore with conservation is that we have been able to move from landmarks as being sites of communal identity. Singapore is a multi-ethnic, multi-religious, multi-generational country. And We have got landmarks that are so important because it allows us to travel through time. When I look at this road on the way to work, I can see, well, whatever someone took a picture of 100 years ago is still there. And if my late grandmother was still alive, she'll still say, I'm going to Chinatown by the Indian temple. She's illiterate, but she knows where she is because of the Hindu temple, Sri Mariamman, right? And for her, that landmark is no longer her, the Indian community is hers as well because it's my neighborhood landmark. So the potential of landmarks, if we were to sell it well, is that we are able to bring people together. Isn't this about sustainability too? Participation, ownership, being part of something bigger, right? We started off with really monuments that are independent in the cityscape because it's how architects thought about city planning, right? And definitely, I think how we choose monuments, the elevation of status is very important in terms of sending a signal. What is our country about? We've got 5% Hindus, 15% Muslims, and we've got less than 2,000 Armenians. In fact, less than 200 Armenians. But the Armenian church is a monument too. I think monuments can send a very strong signal about creating a participatory, inclusive society, right? And recently, we've done a survey with young people and older people and people in between. Where do they have the memories? Where are their memories? Interestingly, many think that national icons and destinations are important. The young people in particular love our airport. It's very new, but I think they've been brainwashed to think it's a national achievement, the airport control tower. So it's positive that we can build a sense of awareness. And old buildings and areas are the next old streets that people hang on to. So are we able to build the next generation of ownership of our old buildings if we let them participate? My theory is on the far right column, the elderly. The elderly value old areas more than the young people because that's where they grew up in the old city while they've moved out. Whereas for the young people, they don't live in the old city. So there's that gap. We must bridge this gap between communities, youth, and our heritage areas, right? Beyond monuments are these streets. This was Singapore of my childhood. Street market, yes. They get the price they want because they want to go home with money to feed the family. And these are things that really we found from the people why they want to conserve. The public has told me, I don't care about your monuments, they are very beautiful. I care about the old streets. Can we keep those because, okay, the top 4 spaces are what we architects tend to think about. The function of heritage as a history lesson. But the bottom 3, space for enterprise, sense of home and community, and then the environmental value are some things that are coming up from the public now. They want an old city that they can use and they can use for the future. The last one for environmental values, I think we have to grapple with this. If most of our buildings that we inherit were built before the age of electricity and therefore by default low carbon, surely we can adopt and adapt those lessons for the future for a low carbon environment. And we should be restoring the old buildings to demonstrate how you can live comfortably without depending only on air conditioning. So lesson, right? So these vernacular buildings are often overlooked in Asian cities because they are just vernacular. They are not grand, they are not greatly historic, they tell the story of the small person, but these are the streets that gives the inhabitants of that city the image of their city. This, I think, for urban planning, we have to think about it. We have to think about it. And in fact, they are often traffic-free, people-centric. They are safe spaces where children can play in the streets, where the grandparents can sit there and watch neighbors go by. And where you know that you don't grow old alone because you're in the community. It's very important for society, right? And especially enterprise. How many small enterprises can go into your new shining malls? Where does a young man or a young woman who wants to have an idea and to bring up, where can they go? It's often the old buildings. Jane Jacobs got it right. New ideas often need old buildings. Small enterprise need the fine-grained fabric of the old city to find its space, to be robust. I think small enterprises form part of a robust economic system. They contain cultural knowledge. And when they come together, they form a community of interested parties, be it traders, craftsmen, etc. Right? And I think in terms of engagement, involvement, and integration, in Singapore at least, and we learned a lot from India about participation, we noticed that people, both existing citizens and our expatriates, they all love to be able to participate in the story of the city by going on sites and share what they know. On the left is Heather. She's a British. She's been volunteering with us for many, many years. And she's not Singaporean in that sense. But when she participates as a tour guide for Singaporeans in the old city, we learn from her, they learn from us, and we come closer together, even though she's from a different background. And from the right, because of social and movement, we bring people together, say, can you build your own community if we bring you together? And they say they're interested because they want to know their neighbors. This is a sad thing. In a big modern city, often we don't know our neighbors. Many landlords don't know their neighbors now because they've inherited the buildings, and they don't know their neighbors unlike their grandparents. So we try to bring them together. But interestingly, because they have the emotional connection to that street through their grandfather or grandmother, they want to restart the conversation. So heritage sites in particular have this potential to rejuvenate society, right? So people do want to be involved, and they are very, very demanding in Singapore. Not as demanding as in India, I think. You guys are really out there in trying to change society for the better. And people really want heritage areas to be for communal and cultural activities, which sounds quite good, right? But what about the clash between communal culture and modern trades? What's wrong with fast food in an old area? What's wrong with a Starbucks in an old area? You know, I get stoned for this back home, but I dare to say Starbucks in an old area, what's wrong? And we have a generational gap, because for my parents' generation, they say, no, it's wrong. It's an international brand in the local area. For the young people, they hang out in Starbucks. If I bring Starbucks, maybe one or two, and I can bring hundreds of young people to hang out there after school or projects to hang out drinking coffee with friends in a healthy environment, and they make good memories as teenagers in an old area, when they grow old, they want to come back because they've got memories. Can we consider that instead of just putting it in a glass box? Right? So when you come to Singapore, there are over 7,000 buildings. I'll be happy to show you around, give you an idea. I think Sunita was very kind to go for a walk with me. It was a very hot day. But we try to make sure that heritage is really part of everyday life. It's part of the city. It's not in a glass box. And I'll showcase a little example called Tiong Bahru. That's the neighborhood I'm living in now. I think if you're a heritage conservationist, try to live in the neighborhood you're working on, because you learn so much. Yeah, you get a lesson in real life, right? So this is very important I think for many of us in planning. We tend not to think about the idea of interaction and the forming of community, but I think this is really quite universal. And therefore, in the neighborhood, I told before, yeah, seniors do feel closer to it because I guess they grew in an old neighborhood. But this neighborhood of Singapore called Tiong Bahru, it's a model estate built before the war to introduce modern housing and modern architecture into a colony that was facing health issues with sanitation, crime, TB, diphtheria, cholera, etc. So it's built in a streamlined, modern style. It's basically apartments with its own flush toilet and gas, electricity, designed for the middle class. And today, it is still a residential area, gazetted. But gazetting a place for conservation is only part of the story about keeping heritage. Often people don't invest in an area because it's uncertain. When you gazette it by law, you list it, it provides certainty, people do want to invest. But investment brings with it other threats. So I'll show you some of the threats that we are facing. On the bottom right, you see some red lion dancing. That's happening today in my hometown because that happens twice a year for the birthday of the monkey god. I'm sure he is related to Hanuman in Hinduism. China and India are very close. So I'm here instead of there for my temple festival. But that is a very important festival that keeps the energy going. But that festival is now facing certain threats because of the change, because of conservation. So about 700 flats, gazetted more than 10 years ago, lots of families, and the Gazette has done wonderful thing. New families have come in with young parents and young children. For a long time, when it's uncertain, young families didn't come in. It was an aging estate. We were very worried. Who would care for it, right? Yeah. And since then, there have been transactions, young families come in, and tourism. There used to be only one white person in the neighborhood on Saturday. Now, 1/3 of the neighborhood are Caucasians who want to live there because they like the scale. And Tiong Bahru is now Little Paris because we have the best French coffee and bread in town, right? But many traditional shops have been replaced by new services. And festivals that have color, sound, or noise are points of tension because the newcomers can't understand why is there a performance on the street for 1 week. To them, it's noisy. Why are we burning offerings for 1 month? It's pollution. Why is there a line dance on the street? It's traffic jam. So how do we deal with this? Because if we don't deal with this, it becomes a flashpoint of incomer and local people disagreeing, right? And while tourism is good because we share our heritage with people, what if I lose my coffee shop? Where instead of, say, $1 Singapore dollar for my coffee every day, I only have a $10 choice. A $10 coffee is a reality in Singapore for the tourists. It's a treat for them. But I can't live every day on a $10 coffee, and I'm a professional. So we have to manage these changes, yeah? Right? But what's been good is that I think because it's heritage and because of reporting, I think reporters are so important. They talk about all these issues and they get it beyond the neighborhood so that people can think about such issues of development at the national level, right? HIP taking over, modernization boom. We have to also be careful that nostalgia doesn't hold us back. An old neighborhood is very charming to look at, it's nice to look at, but if you live there, you want to have modernity too. So how do you manage this change? So I think the lesson often is, as long as the modernity meets the needs of the local community, then we are safe. If local people want a new shop, that's okay. But if someone wants to invest in the neighborhood because they think it's a great deal for them, we have to be careful. So yeah, right now it's hipster land, but do come and spend your money in my neighborhood. It's very nice. We have a nice bookshop, right? So what's quite interesting is that in the local community, this is the emotional part. When local people want to retire and they sell their shop or they rent their shop to a new business, we feel sad, but we accept it. Mr. Goh has been working since he was 17. Now that he's 75, he needs to retire. He deserves it. But when someone comes in and makes a hostile bid for business and puts in a yoga studio, people react differently. So the difference is, I think, where things are coming from and whether there's a mediation in the community to talk about the future of a heritage site. If it was a normal neighborhood of modern buildings, I think people won't feel emotionally involved. They'll just accept it. But because it's heritage, I think there's emotional weight or baggage, right? What the state can do in Singapore, my colleagues, they do make sure that we invest in storytelling as a start. We invest in getting researchers to put stories into the streets so that it's on black and white on paper. Many stories on the trail are actually from the community. They have been oral traditions for the longest time. But interestingly, at least in the Chinese community, until it's written in black and white, it doesn't have the weight of it being really historical. But once things are written down in black and white and proven through research, people feel so empowered that their history is recognized, and we can use this to do more research and more sharing, right? And they do a lot of documentation. But we also have to think about the people. Crisis is useful. This happened more than 10 years ago, in 2008. The town council wanted to repaint the estate into this mix of a very horrible blue and cream, or a very horrible gray and yellow. And that caused so much outrage amongst the residents, especially the new ones who were more vocal, that they banded together to say, we have to have a charter for our neighborhood to protect it. I think this is where the old community and the new community can come together and say, we have our wishes and dreams, but if you're new and you're young, you know the world, you know the systems, help us to look after our interests. So crisis can often be very good, and now it's all white and gray. Very, very, white and little gray, very timeless, and we are very happy with it. Right. This is a group that was formed for the color. Okay, that's me there a little bit. And this group and the spin-offs have also been able to intervene at the local level. A coffee shop, an eating house that was closing because the tea master was retiring, was able to find a new future because they went to us on social media, who's interested to invest in this neighborhood to keep us our coffee shop. Really, through the power of Facebook, someone came to say, okay, I will invest in this. I will run a Japanese restaurant at night. But in the daytime, I'll give you a coffee shop as long as I can find a new coffee person to run it. So you've got a win-win solution. Coffee shop for the community daytime, Japanese restaurant at night to meet the rental needs. So we need to be quite creative in meeting the old and new economies and keeping things for the people. But without the people, this wouldn't have happened, right? I think the people sector have been very creative using heritage sites for contemporary art. A group here called Open House, they worked with people to open their house and to put in contemporary art. And this provoked the interest in many, many people to visit homes. We're all very curious about homes. You rarely get to go in someone's home, right? But this was a very valid reason to traipse through 20 apartments to see what people lived like in contemporary art. So this also demystifies heritage. It demystifies the fact that you can live in an old apartment very comfortably without air conditioning, right? And another public sector response is very positive, has been the investment by community into volunteering to be guides. We've got almost 200 guided tours in the past 5 years through volunteers in different languages, all free and all targeted at locals. Very often tours in cities are targeted at tourists as a commercial product. How about the local people? The local people often are unwilling or unable to pay for tours because of the price difference. So they'll go for free tours. So this has fulfilled the objective of making heritage understandable by other Singaporeans and other residents, and they can understand the neighborhood to build a consensus that is important to keep. And we were very touched when we opened up the air raid shelter. It was built before the war. The lady in the middle, Mary Pereira, her father came from South India, and she appeared because of this storytelling collection. She said, "Oh, I was born in this air raid shelter in January 1942. I was born on the night my father went as a volunteer for the air raid duty, and he was killed by shrapnel. He never came back. On the day she was born, her father died. And she had never been back there before. So for her to go back with her two brothers was very emotional for her, and it was very emotional for us. And even more importantly, with this story, we can make the horror of war and the price of peace real for young people who otherwise read about it in a book and they say, oh, it's propaganda. Think about it. How can we make history real for people when often they think of what's in books as propaganda? That's the first part. The second part, because she has forgiven the Japanese, we can also tell young people, it's the past, we must build the future, because she can forgive. If she can forgive, can we look at forgiveness as well? So this is the power of heritage for a better society, right? We have a garden now. Last year, Prince Charles and his consort did come to visit, and we were very happy to hear he came because he heard about this estate and this garden, and he is not a fan of modern architecture, as we all know. But he was very happy to see that modernism could be created in a way that was actually very humane. And this, again, helped reinforce in the community that what they have something special. I think this kind of endorsement by key people in the country and outside can inspire people to continue their hard work of volunteerism, of creating communities. And of course, we also work with low-income children and students in tourism, again, to help them understand history. In particular, what's quite movable is the low-income children. There's a neighborhood near where I stay, about 15 minutes walk. These kids, they don't have the chance to read at home because their parents are so busy working. And so a friend of mine, she's a lawyer, she's got a group of lawyers, to just read to them and read with them. And recently she said, can we bring them to your neighborhood? Because they should understand the neighborhood. So we got some murals, and we got together to bring them a walk to talk about histories and stories. And because we want them, the youths, to also think about conservation as part of their memory, where they got good memories so they want to come back. Because if they don't see heritage as part of where they grow up, where they have fun in school, after school, why would they love it? Why would I have young people to take over our cause of conservation? And these young people, they said, until you brought us in here, we would never cross the road to your neighborhood because we don't think we are welcome, just because we are poor. For us, we never felt that they were unwelcome, but we didn't understand for them their own lack of self-esteem actually kept them away. So that bridge building is so important in wanting to have young people participate and for neighborhoods to be inclusive. Yeah. So, final slides, some observations. I think that heritage areas, be it monuments or neighborhoods or small villages or streets, really, they are so important as vernacular areas. But not enough research has been created in this field to understand the emotional pool of vernacular areas. We have a lot of information about iconic buildings. If you were to say Taj Mahal, let's turn to something else, I think there would be a revolt. But if you say a little street somewhere in India that's very, very beautiful, historic, but we don't know about it, perhaps reaction is less, right? And I think for the community, quite interestingly, my neighbors in Tiong Bahru, they love the community connections, they love the interpersonal ties, but you ask them, would you therefore spend money to restore your building properly to have 1930s crystal windows or proper glass? They'll say, no, it's my home, why must I restore it? So I will take a lesson from this morning's talk. I must summarize it to 5 points and repeat it to them 10,000 times, right? So because I think the physical fabric and the social fabric go together, but often the communities don't understand the impact of a change in social fabric, right? And finally, for sustainability, okay, a lot of words. Essentially, I think vernacular buildings, if they can be homes for people and they can be settled, I think it's a very powerful resource for the future in terms of really just motivating people to do the right thing. For sustainability, be the environment, the economy, or the community, unless our values are correct, we will make the right decisions. We can make the right decisions, but will we, right? So even the idea of cutting energy. I have heritage buildings where the monthly bill for electricity is 100 Singapore dollars, which is very, very low in our standards. And the same apartment down the road, the monthly bill is $2,000 because the homeowner has gotten a designer to air condition everything. Which is better? How do I change it from $2,000 to $100 and comfortably? I don't mean for us to live in a very uncomfortable environment, but as a designer, as conservationists, we can do something. And finally, young people. For those of us who are in our various fields here, how do we talk to young people to make them feel welcome in the conversation, to make them feel that they can participate, they can be part of that change? Because very often in Asia, young people look up to seniors as gurus or teachers. They are quite shy, in Singapore at least. And we dare not ask them questions because we feel it would be stupid if I ask a stupid question, right? But if we can overcome that cultural gap, the young people will help us find a better way because they understand culture, heritage, and history. So thank you very much. I hope that I will be able to learn more from you about how you preserve heritage in India, and also a little bit about how heritage conservation in Singapore is really not about buildings only. The potential is about sustainability and community building. Thank you.
Thank you so very much, Kelvin. I, sitting backstage, enjoyed the presentation so very much. Thank you for sharing with us how Singapore is not just modern, but how it has so many of these beautiful elements, and how you, along with your team in the government, are working towards creating these out-of-the-box ideas in conserving the built heritage. And like he very rightly mentioned, it's very important for our future generations to identify with our own country's identity, which is why conservation of built heritage is so very important. He mentioned how that connect with the youth is so very important for them to create those fond memories and take it further. So thank you, Kelvin. We hope you enjoy your stay here in India and you enjoy the Indian heritage as much. Ladies and gentlemen, this is what takes us to our next segment, which is a very interesting chat session with two of the very best from the industry. May I please request all of you to put your hands together as I welcome on stage architect Muneshwarnath Ashish Kanju, architect, teacher, president, Greha New Delhi. I'd also like to welcome architect Narendra Dingle, architect, writer and educationalist, Pune, to tell us more about the indigenous perspectives, the discovery and the history of architecture. A round of applause as we welcome them both.
Well, good afternoon. afternoon. It's a great privilege to be sitting on the stage before you and to talk about what we've been doing over the last few years in trying to produce a better understanding of a discipline which we have been practicing, both of us, for nearly 4 decades, and finding that our indigenous reality, which we have called it, that is the life around us and the way the profession has been performing, if you like, or has become kind of disjointed with a whole tradition of values which have been nursed in our civilization over hundreds and hundreds of years. We are all aware of that, but what we are not aware of is how we make a bridge with those values and yet respect indigenous reality, where we live today and how we live today, and all our fellow beings on this rather fragile planet at the moment. So with that little thing, we are going to, both of us have to talk about this, and we have half an hour. So the first thing to put before you is the cover, what you're seeing on the screen behind, is the cover of a book that both of us put together and was published now in about 6 years ago, 2013, after a dialogue which we both engaged in, a structured dialogue for about a year. In order to, because we'd been practicing for about 40 years and teaching in various schools of architecture in the country and abroad, but we sort of came to a conclusion that we weren't quite penetrating our discipline. We would expect much more of an ancient discipline like architecture in terms of what it would offer to the people for whom it is meant to be, to serve. Somehow, even though we had very diligently worked for such a long time, we felt that we were not quite connecting with our reality. So we did a dialogue, we put together a book. It's a small book, a thin book, but it was received, we did it so that we could start a line of communication with our fellow professionals and with people interested in architecture. Because I think we found when we do talk to people in daily life, that many people, most people are very interested in the subject. But it somehow seems that the subtleties and the depth of the profundity of the subject is not quite appreciated. And I'm talking about our local situation and of today. I am not talking about there are the academies where all the work is going on, intellectual work, but the academies seem to be lost in a private language, which is not really available to the general public. And today, for instance, you may note that this country is going through an extraordinarily large investment program for what is called building infrastructure, and in our cities and in the rural areas. And building infrastructure means, not just housing, but roads and public buildings and everything else that goes along with our daily life, which touches our daily life, The figures are astounding. They're not worth mentioning because they run into lakhs of crores, and it's impossible to imagine what that means in terms of our lives. However, the fact of the matter is that the architectural profession is hardly consulted. Or if they are, they're consulted at the end of a whole chain of decision-making where, they're expected to perhaps beautify the place or to sometimes market it, package it and market it effectively. Now, this seems an extraordinary inversion of values to me. It was this kind of inversion we thought that needs to be studied more carefully and needs to be very researched into. And we set up a team. Maybe you could continue about this.
First of all, I think I should thank Sunita Kohli and Times of India Group, the architects as well as people from humanities. And we spent a lot of time together, and we have been meeting over the last 2 or 3 years, actually 4 years. And one volume of our discussions, all the discussions have been recorded, they have been edited, and one volume is likely to come very soon. The point that Ashish was making here is, how did we start with this, and then what happened thereafter? So after this book was produced, this was peer-reviewed. There were 6 teachers and practitioners from all over the place. Delhi, Bombay, Bangalore, and Chennai. And we sat together, and in Bhopal, they created a platform for us. In Delhi also. And then this was discussed. They said that this should be brought out in form of a book. The original idea wasn't so. And then the book was brought out. Then a lot of colleges took a lot of interest. Bombay and Ahmedabad and Intac here and SPA Delhi. So we had discussions attended by a lot of teachers and practitioners. And so this has gone a little ahead from there. One of the things that we experienced is today we find that the students of AA in London have kind of come out with a statement. They are completely disillusioned with the system of education in their own place. AA was looked upon as a kind of a very star kind of institution to which Ashish had the privilege to attend. And in his CV, he says that he returned to India for higher education. So which...
Absolutely true. Most of my colleagues at that time were going to the West, to the USA. But I graduated in, about 55 years ago, and they were all going to America. That was the new world. I came back here and I found myself much at home. Of course, I found things very changed. Myself changed, actually. And I decided to the rest of my education to be done here, because what you really need is not a university. What you need is a teacher. And I felt that in this country, we have some of the greatest teachers that there have lived on this planet over the last, I don't know how long. And somehow it was just a feeling. So I mean that very seriously, that I came back to India in 1967 for higher education. And I continue to do that, try and do that.
I think the 4 points that are mentioned in this book, 4-point matrix, is something that we have to look at.
May I give a little? This book, which you saw, and what are the pictures behind us are going to be very, very few. But these pictures are simply pictures of our work, because we do wish to make the point that we are not ivory tower teachers, but we practice. So what you're seeing is evidence, some evidence of our work. It's rather a large body of work, and I think it'd be very boring if one had to go through all of it. But just a few examples to make the point that we do practice. This is all recent works in the last 20, 30 years. Recent.
Last 5-6 years, I think.
Maybe. No, even longer. But anyway, it's difficult to... This one is recent. Yes. The thing is that in this, when we sat down to look at what constituted architecture, the meaning of architecture for us today, after a little bit of discussion, we came to what we thought was an analytical matrix which would help us to think about the subject matter in a more organized way. And I think that matrix is what... may I read that out then? I'll have to wear my glasses. really need this. Do you want to change the slide again?
No, last slide we may have to change.
Okay. You see, we needed a framework on which to think about architecture, which we felt would respect not only our ancient values, but also be in tune with indigenous reality, with what we live in today. That's extremely important. But after much discussion, we arrived at this matrix as a following thing. The first section of that is entitled Self as Community. And what that means is that physical reality is perceived by the individual self, and it is given meaning by the community or some subsection of society. This is a dynamic and a symbiotic relationship. When self assumes the nature of community, there is a creative interaction, which results in, the next section says, action coupled with awareness. Now, this could refer to any transformation of physical reality. But in the case of architecture, it would refer to the act of building, guided by the awareness of an evolving universe. Once the building or neighborhood is made, it requires, and that's the third section, maintenance as renewal. Once built, the physical object is subject to entropy and will decay. Hence, a continuous activity of maintenance is essential to renew and extend its life and usefulness so that it remains an asset to the community. Renewal brings awareness of time and the rhythm of life and death. And this leads to the fourth section, regeneration with learning. The matrix therefore becomes a spiral, allowing the new generation to evolve to a higher or more subtle reality, informed by the learning and knowledge of earlier generations. So this matrix became the basis of our discussions and further discourse. Now perhaps you could describe our further discourse, what happened later.
The first point took a lot of time for us. First point of self as community. And self as community would mean something that we saw in Majoli, for instance. There was a mention of Majoli this morning. I noticed there that the decisions are taken in a community about the space management, even Koliwadas in Bombay, how much to extend your house, how much to give public space, how much to have first floor enhancement of your house, etc. were done collectively. So there is a system traditionally existent in communities and which we have perhaps lost. You're not completely lost. I mean, there are cooperative societies which do take decisions, but cooperative societies, unlike in some of these South Delhi societies, are kind of forced communities because these are bought over by people who can afford. Here, there is a mechanism available of sitting together and taking a collective decision. It's not about the space, it's also about the construction and the detail.
Today a very difficult thing. One of the things in our urban living has become the absence of genuine collectives.
Yeah.
So hence this was a very important point.
Yes.
We are all very concerned about the self. As individuals, we can perform and we can understand the world. But as a collective, it is something which is increasingly becoming a rare thing.
But I realized in Bombay recently, the Mahada housing which was done in the 80s, which is all collapsing and dilapidated conditions. People are living middle class, lower middle class housing. And now what is to be done? And there are 200 cooperative societies which, the middle class person paid money out of their salaries and owned a good shelter. And now the condition was terrible. So what is to be done? And they went to the developers. Sorry. They went to the developers, and the developers, of course, told them that you'll get some extra amount, 10, 20 lakhs more, an additional space. And also, the developer would pay for the rent where they would be located until the construction is done. But the events in this country happened in such a way that there was no money available. And suddenly the developer dried up the funds. With the result, some of the people had to go to slums, practically. So people who had paid out of their salaries and owned homes had to move to slums. To counter this, the people have come back together, and they are now thinking of doing housing, redeveloping their own community housing, which was not done that way, now collectively. So I think there is some kind of re-understanding of the issues, and this is where the matter pinches everybody in Bombay. I was thinking that we have to see the self as the I as I. So there is an outer space and there is an inner space, inner reality, outer reality. The other one is the I and the other, and I and the nature. So if you have to place I centrally, which is what we have been doing forever, instead of that, if you place the consciousness for nature in the center, the configuration completely changes, which is where you were talking about what is happening to this planet. And you might want to say what Dalai Lama's thing is currently happening. He was mentioning that currently Dalai Lama was not well. And the entire community had decided that there would not be any new groundbreaking ceremony for the next 6 months.
1 year.
1 year. So the understanding is completely different. You're talking about something which is very physical, that there is a ground and there is a building to be built.
Which they've maintained, learn from us in India, and which they have maintained very carefully, unlike ours. And in short-term courses, so a new building was planned. But then we are holding it for this entire year. We cannot begin construction because, the leader, His Holiness, his stars are not good this year in terms of his health. And the entire community has decided, as Narendra says, that